as Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari addresses the nation today after 14 days of relaxation of the lockdown of the Federal Capital Territory, Lagos and Ogun states that he had imposed on March 30th in order to curb the spread of COVID-19. The organized private sector, OPS, and Labour have both indicated their opposition to a fresh shutdown of the economy. Now, leading members of the sector and the Nigeria Labour Congress spoke to our sister outfit yesterday, and said that a fresh lockdown of the economy would be retrogressive and would also have tremendous negative economic and social consequences on the country. The opposition was canvassed by the Nigeria Employers Consultative Assembly, NECA, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI, and also the Nigerian Association of Chambers and Commerce and Industry, Mines and Agriculture, NACIMA. And a professor of financial economics and the director of the Center for Economic Policy Analysis and Research at the University of Lagos, Professor Ndubisi Nwakoma, in a separate interview with our outfit this day. Meanwhile, Nigeria yesterday recorded 338 new cases of the novel coronavirus, bringing our total tally to 5,959. Announcing this last night, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control said Lagos recorded 177 new cases, Kano 64, the Federal Capital Territory 21, Rivers 16, Plateau States 14, Oyo 11, Katsina 9, Jigawa and Kaduna 4 each, Abia, Bauchi, and Borno 3 each, Gombe, Akwa Ibom, and Delta 2 each, while Ondo, Kebbi, and Sokoto recorded 1 new case each. The number of discharged patients has increased from 1,472 to 1,594, while fatalities have increased from 176 to 182. So, Doctor, we have now conducted over 33,000 tests, and we have seen a really high rise in cases yesterday, 383 new cases. Some analysts may look at this and say, is this relative to the easing of the lockdown that started 2 weeks ago? And there are a lot of questions that we're going to have to ask and answer. But what is your take on the new statistics that we are seeing and, of course, our COVID updates?
Well, I mean, I think it's possible to just conclude that the more testing that is carried out, the more likely the numbers are likely to rise. And of course, you know, the projection is that Nigeria will conduct up to 2 million tests by June. We hope that we'll be able to get to that. But if we conduct up to 2 million, then of course, you know, we should expect more numbers. Yeah. But as the chairman of the Presidential Task Force pointed out yesterday, this is a marathon. It's not as if COVID-19 or coronavirus is going to disappear overnight, and it's for government to have a long-term strategy and for people to also take responsibility, because one of the concerns that has been expressed is the fact that, you know, people are lackadaisical about the guidelines, and of course I guess that includes even government officials themselves who do not respect their own guidelines. But today, as at yesterday, the 14-day extension of the relaxation of the lockdown, or rather the announcement of the easing of the lockdown that the president did on April 27. The first phase of 2 weeks ended yesterday. So today we've been told that the president is going to address the country again and offer a new procedural template in terms of how we deal with the challenge. But however, we've seen in Ogun State where the governor says the extension will continue in Ogun State. That's the lockdown will continue. In Lagos, the message we're getting is that government is planning to reopen the economy in Lagos because of the implications. And the government is announcing a mechanism it calls register to open, whereby there will be an evaluation of business places. But of course, we'll wait for what the president will say today. As for organized private sector is concerned about the impact on the economy and the number of jobs, millions of jobs that will be lost as a result of a return to a lockdown of the economy. Well, their position is understandable. Business people all over the world will want businesses to reopen. But the issue is, how do you strike a balance between the rate of infection and also ensuring business continuity? Exactly. I think that delicate balance is something we need to work out. Exactly. And by the way, Madagascar, that everyone is looking up to for COVID organics, recorded its first death out of a total of 300 4 cases. What does that mean?
Which is still good.
How will Nigerians interpret it? I do not know.
Absolutely. And to be honest with you, I'm sure the whole world has been looking at Madagascar and saying, when are they going to record their first death? And yes, here it is, a 47-year-old man. 57-year-old man, I beg your pardon. But what I was going to say on OPS is that they did also say that looking at jobs, a fresh lockdown could lead to a loss of 2.7 million jobs again, which is a high number. So there are a lot of surveys and a lot of analysis out there that government needs to look into and consider. But let's move on, Doctor. Nigeria has impounded a plane operated by a British company for allegedly contravening a flight ban that was imposed to prevent the spread of coronavirus. Now, passenger flights into the country, with the exception of those to evacuate people or repatriate Nigerian citizens, have been banned for weeks, as we know. The ban is going to remain in place until June 4th at least. However, flights for essential services, such as the delivery of food and supply items for humanitarian use, are permitted. Aviation Minister Hadi Sirika said on Twitter on Sunday that a plane had been impounded after the rules were broken. He said a UK company was given approval for humanitarian operations, but was caught conducting commercial flights. An aviation ministry spokesman, James Oduadu, also said that the plane was operated by a company called Flairjet. Meanwhile, Flairjet, a British private charter company that's an affiliate of FlexJet, has said that the matter is an evolving situation. So we are being told that this plane was given access for humanitarian operations, but that was a guise, and they came in wanting to have commercial operations, and the minister responded in this way. But, Doctor, I know you have several questions to ask here.
Well, I think what we're dealing with is a case of governance failure.
Yeah.
It's not only medical failure that we're complaining about, in terms of managing COVID-19 or communication failure. This is clearly a failure of governance, which has been demonstrated in many ways. You will recall that in March, when all the airports were shut down and flights were banned in and out of Nigeria, except, flights involving essential services. The whole idea then was to stop the importation of coronavirus into Nigeria. Now, that lockdown of the aviation sector was extended by another 4 weeks on May 6th, and it was announced by the Minister of Aviation. Now, under the lockdown, the Presidential Task Force took a decision that any essential flight must be approved directly by the Minister of Aviation. So the question you now ask is the same Minister of Aviation that is coming to the public to complain about an airline that had been given approval for humanitarian flights now engaged in commercial flights. So what exactly happened in the office of the Minister of Aviation? Who gave that approval? Could it have been any of the officials working under him? We may not hold him personally responsible, right?
But we still hold
considering the fact that, there may be some other officials under him. So whoever gave that approval should be identified. And secondly, was there a process in place for monitoring? And for how long has this gone on? And, those commercial flights operated by this this airline, Flair Aviation, who were the passengers? Now, those passengers that were brought into the country, are they big men who did not self-isolate, who just went into the population? Exactly. So it's not enough to just say we have impounded the aircraft, we will impose a maximum penalty. I think it's also important to identify those passengers and where they are, and where they came from and how they entered the country. So these are the, the due diligence processes that I think the Ministry of Aviation still has to look into. Certainly. Now, beyond this, what should happen next? We cannot shut down the aviation sector permanently. And I'm sure the airline operators of Nigeria, must have been saying that, look, it's about time we opened up. If we allow the airlines to begin to function again, then maybe the thing to do is to put in place proper protocols, a different protocol, because the future of travel, of course, has changed forever. Second, I don't think it is in order that it's the Minister of Aviation that is giving approvals. There is a body called the Nigeria Civil Aviation Authority. Now, when the situation is reviewed, that NCAA should be allowed to do its work, because nature abhors a vacuum. If you say it's the minister that should do it, then what do you do about that particular body? So these are some of the issues that I think should be addressed. NCAA should function, and then we should just go beyond impounding the aircraft and interrogating the crew. And all those private jets that have been flying up and down carrying big men, we will need to know Who gave the approval? And did those people coming from abroad, did they self-isolate? We can't have different rules for different people.
Thank you.
That's where the governance failure lies.
Because there are also several cases that have been mentioned over the past few weeks of people going in and out through private jets. And at the end of the day, all of this needs to be looked into because the rules cannot apply to certain people and not to others. But that is all that we do have on the news headlines for now. We'll take a short break. And when we are back, our trio, Rota Sodiri and Marcus Wilson, and of course, Aaron Akerejola, will be here to give us some updates for today. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Joining us now is Rotus Odiri to give us business updates.
Good morning, Rotus. Still on aviation?
Yeah, still funny you're talking about the impounding of that British plane. On the business side of things, African Airlines are they're struggling. The CEO of Ethiopian Airlines gave an interview. His name is Tewolde Gebremariam. Very similar to the Ghebreyesus, the Dr. Tedros of course, they're both Ethiopian, of the head of the WHO. So yeah, look, African Airlines are set to lose about $6 billion in 2020. That was at $4 billion in March. It's increased, and it may continue to increase as the year continues. He was asked whether African governments have the capability to bail out the airlines compared to the scale of the US and Europe. He said no, they cannot. They're unable to do it. He was then asked, okay, are African banks willing to then lend to the airlines to help them out? He said they're hesitant. And why are they hesitant? It makes sense. Would you lend to a business that is struggling to, get passengers? Would you lend to a business that demand has shut down for them? So the banks are very skittish with regards to lending to them. And he says air traffic, this is an estimate. He said air traffic 2020 versus 2019 could drop by 34%. But the International Air Traffic Association, IATA, there's something called revenue passenger kilometers, RPKs. There's domestic RPKs and there's international RPKs. RPKs for domestic, they said, might drop 40%. For international, it's anywhere from 50 to 60%. And the news just gets worse. I think Emirates announced just yesterday that they are cutting about 30,000. They're looking to cut about, news media outlets said that Emirates is looking to cut about 30,000 jobs and also retire their A380 planes. The A380s are the biggest commercial lines right now. They're double-decker planes, carry about 500 passengers. So, and that's what they operate in the Middle East and, of course, in Africa. So you put all this together with struggling, the lack of demand, lack of assistance from African governments, lack of lending coming from, resistance to lending coming from African banks, and the aviation industry for Africa is...
this is shocking.
It's not looking good.
At all.
Well, it's a very precarious situation, not just for the aviation sector in Africa, but also globally.
Yes.
Yeah.
With coronavirus, one of the most negatively impacted sectors in the world is the global aviation system. And you add to that the travel and tourism section. Now, even before COVID-19, the aviation sector in Africa was embattled. Coronavirus has just made it worse. Yes. And in terms of the future of travel in Africa, we're also going to see a lot of impact, a lot of negative impact, because the question you ask is how many airlines in Africa can even prepare for that future of travel in terms of, digitalization, in terms of what happens in terms of travel. I guess fewer people will travel. In terms of, physical distancing inside the aircraft. If you're going to observe physical distancing inside the aircraft, that will also have implications for revenue.
Yes.
So you find that in the aviation sector generally, whatever may have been gained in the last 7 years, has more or less been wiped out. So there is the prospect of job losses, sharp drop already in revenue, and it could even drop further. And then, of course, at the end of the day, you talk about the role of government and the financial sector, the banks. Now, what we have seen elsewhere is that government will provide a bailout. I think in the U.S. it's up to about, is it 50 billion?
29 or something, almost 30.
Almost $30 billion for the aviation sector alone. Now, in Africa, how many governments can do that?
That's our budget.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
30 billion is Nigeria's budget.
Theoretically,
so
we can ask for government to bail out. The government that cannot even provide food for people in quarantine centers, that is saying we cannot afford it. to now take the burden of the entire aviation sector. But what should some of these African countries do? Perhaps, I think the protracted lockdown of the aviation sector may not, in the long run, be in the best interest of those airlines. Because you see, in Europe and in the US, the airlines have not been shut down. Airports have not been shut down in many places. Now, is it possible for a country like Nigeria, for example, to, by the first week of June, allow these airlines to begin to fly again with new protocols in place? But some airlines will, of course, collapse. Those airlines that do not have the capacity will collapse. We may probably see mergers and acquisitions. And in the world, some airlines have already declared their bankruptcy.
The second oldest airline ever, right? If I'm correct, has declared bankruptcy. It's a really worrying situation.
So we're likely to have something in that direction also here in Nigeria. But the most painful part of it is the job loss. Because here in Nigeria already we have seen the evidence. Arike had announced, first was it a 90% cut in salaries, and then staff have been sent on leave. After Arike, we had Air Peace also crying out, and the chairman of the company telling the staff that many of them will have to go on unpaid leave. It could get worse.
Honestly, seriously is. Rotas, thank you for today's updates, and we'll see you tomorrow. And moving on now for a more global outlook on business today, Michael Wilson joins us from London. Good morning, Michael. How are you?
Good morning, Michael.
The aviation industry you've just touched on is a huge subject here as well, obviously, in terms of not just the people who work directly for airlines, but also all the supply companies who are actually making parts of planes as well. And the question of whether there ought to be some kind of government help for that is an on-running thing. Same in the United States as well. Anyway, that's that. Let's have a look at the markets. Asia up a bit. Japan into technical recession for the first time since 2015. Let me remind you about Japan as well, that their debt to GDP ratio is one of the highest properly quoted in the world, 237%. So Japan is in a lot of difficulty at the moment, but that is not at the moment didn't affect Asian markets overnight, probably won't affect the European markets as they come into play as we speak. Expecting slightly more. China's industrial production figures have actually helped things too. The US trade talks with China still continue. We're hoping for some results on that. But Jay Powell, the chairman of the Fed in the United States, the Federal Reserve Bank, Central Bank of the United States, said in an interview over the weekend, and the markets will have to digest this, that the US economy will not return back to normal until the end of 2021. What normal means, I don't really know. To be honest, I wouldn't have thought that it was ever normal, but he's talking about resuming business, presumably as usual. So it's going to take a year and a bit for that to happen. Let's see how that actually plays with the markets. You two, I've got a job for you, one of you anyway. Do you want to know what it is? It pays well, and it's very influential. And it's the Director General of the World Trade Organization. They're searching for somebody because there was a bit of a surprise on Friday, which I did tell you about, which is their Director General, Roberto Acevedo, said that he's not going to continue for the normal 2-year term. He's going to go at the end of this. I think the World Trade Organization has been feeling a lot of pressure, particularly from very big players, including the United States, of course. But nevertheless, the World Trade Organization said if we weren't here, there'd be a jungle out there. So it could be a job for you. You want to think about that. I'm sure both of you are intelligent enough to do it extremely well. Over the weekend, now here's another one. Now we have talked about the markets. You constantly ask me where I think they're going. I have no better idea than most people. I can tell you, though, that the Saudis have been picking up some bargains, and here's what they are. Excuse me looking down at my list, but they are BP, Boeing, Facebook, Bank of America, Walt Disney, Starbucks, Citigroup, and Pfizer. Those are big, what we would call blue chip stocks that have actually taken a beating over the past month or two, and the Saudis have come and spent a lot of money investing in those. So there's always somebody actually ready to rock with share prices. Here's an additional one for you. One of the reasons that people invest in equities is because of things called dividends. You know what those are. Those are being cut as companies actually scramble to protect their balance sheet. I've got a figure here of $800 billion worldwide. Means absolutely nothing, does it really? But it's huge. And those companies, that not just about whether the share price goes up and down, but your actual income from those companies, which is what the dividends actually are very attractive to investors. And that's why they tend to favour equities rather than government bonds. You'll be asking also the gap between what happens in the financial markets and what happens to Mr. and Mrs. Normal, like perhaps you and me. Why is there a difference between the two? Why are the markets taking off when we've seen all the damage coming from the coronavirus pandemic? Answer: because markets actually look at what's going to happen in the future. They're not interested in the levels of where markets are actually now. They're interested in how they're actually going to increase. Makes no sense, but it does to investors. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Saudis, who are no slouches about this kind of thing, have actually been investing over the weekend. We've got another one for you, which is oil. I know that obviously Nigeria is very important to Nigeria as well. In the United States, the Commodities Commission is actually looking at ways of making the market there a bit more liquid, which would stop events that happened in April. Do you remember when the cost of the price of a barrel of oil was less than a storage tank? I mean, that was ridiculous, wasn't it? That was the market actually going down. It has come back a bit. As far as the markets are concerned this week, sterling will continue to be weak, as far as I can see, because of the EU trade talks, and also another official from the Bank of England saying he's not ruling out negative interest rates here. I'm going to take you through some just quickies coming up this week, which will be very important. Walmart, Home Depot, JCPenney, Hewlett-Packard, UK retail sales, and of course, the Federal Open Markets Committee, the interest rate setters at the Federal Reserve, will be publishing the minutes of their last meeting this week. So a busy week as far as statistics are concerned, and I very much look forward to taking you through it.
Well, thank you very much, Michael Wilson. Thank you indeed.
Thank you very much.